During the launch of the Ryzen 7000 series recently, AMD had also gone over some details of the upcoming AM5 platform. I didn't really talk about that in my previous video, so I wanted to follow up. Let's discuss that in this video. Hey, if you enjoy content like this, drop a like, make sure to subscribe, and smash that bell so you never miss another video. Hey, what is going on guys? Danny here, welcome back to the channel and I hope you've all been doing well. My last video seems to have riled up a lot of people, and what I found surprising was by how many people said they were blown away by Zen 4, considering most people who had been following my videos for a while now had the same sort of outlook on Zen 4 as I did. But hey, when you talk about AMD, it seems to attract the fanboys who just want to call you an Intel fanboy and defend their marketing. Right, I'm that Intel fanboy who owns no Intel CPUs, but has 8 Ryzen systems in their household, but I digress. Which by the way, if you're just gonna cry, bitch, and moan about how I talk negatively about your precious AMD, you can leave your dislike and fuck off, because I'm not gonna be paying any heed to that nonsense. Now, one of the things that kept on being brought up in the comments was how AMD said they're going to be committed to the socket AM5, and how that'll be a huge selling point for people looking at purchasing Zen 4, or just wanting to go on to the AM5 platform in general. Now, since that previous video was focused on CPUs, I thought I'd also talk about AM5 in this video as a follow-up, as well as address some of the stuff that was said which people were disagreeing with. At the announcement, AMD's David McAfee talked about AM5's new features, and along with that, highlighted the features of the upcoming 600 series motherboards.
We've built the platform around next generation technologies so that you can build today and upgrade as your needs grow over time. And just like AM4, we're making a commitment to support the AM5 platform with new technologies and next generation architectures through at least 2025. I'm really excited about the next era of Ryzen desktops with AM5.
So they said they plan on supporting socket AM5 just like they did with socket AM4, which definitely sounds promising at first. However, people are misunderstanding what he said. When they said support of socket AM5 is planned through at least 2025, maybe longer, it literally just means that the socket itself will be supported to at least 2025 plus. Had he said that we also plan on working with motherboard manufacturers to ensure future compatibility of next-gen Ryzen products with these 600 series motherboards until 2025 plus, then I would have been hyped and could say, okay, they really are committed to this. But just saying support of AM5, it's really just clever marketing, and it clearly worked since so many people were mentioning that in the comments of that last video. When Zen 5 comes out down the road, of course we know with a new gen, AMD always releases a new series of motherboards that will be compatible with the new CPU series so that new system builders don't have to worry about flashing older model boards. But they could just as easily say, look, we kept AM5, but Zen 5 is going to be exclusive to the X670 motherboards, or whatever they choose to call them at that time. They aren't saying that they're committed to older chipsets, all they're saying is they're committed to the socket, and that's not the same thing. Either the people commenting haven't really been in the industry for long, or they have short-term memory. Let's go back to the summer of 2020. This was before the Zen 3 Ryzen 5000 series was announced. Robert Halleck posted an article on their community blog site talking about the exciting future of AMD socket AM4. They talked about how AM4 supported 4 different architectures, nodes, PCIe tech, and more. In the questions and facts section, a question asked if Zen 3 will be compatible with AMD socket AM4, and they did say yes, but they said Zen 3 would only work with X570 and B550 motherboards. They also posted a slide showing compatibility going forward. As you can see, AMD hadn't ever planned on bringing Zen 3 to X370, B350, A320, X470, and B450 motherboards. This was a huge segmentation of their current user base. This pissed off a lot of people, and there was quite a bit of backlash they received for this. They specifically stated AMD has no plans to introduce Zen 3 architecture to older chipsets. Their reasoning was due to flash memory limitations, which was a total BS excuse, as it was evident by the plethora of old chipset motherboards that are working even with a 5800X3D. Their partners prior to that had even released boards such as the MSI B450 Tomahawk, which advertised future compatibility. Not to mention, 400 series boards had only been out for a couple years at that point, and they were already canning support for this. Well, not too long after that, AMD came out with a statement where they said, "You guys were right, we're going to be expanding support for Zen 3 to be compatible with 400 series motherboards, however 300 series were not included in this." While this made a lot of people happy, 300 series owners were left out, and what I find absolutely hysterical was that the AMD defenders were telling people they should be grateful they got 2 additional generations of CPUs to work with their motherboards, but then on my video that I had recently made, they're using the same selling point, thinking 600 series boards will hold them over in the long run until 2025 plus. So Zen 3 was released in November 2020, and if you didn't have a 400 or 500 series motherboard and wanted to upgrade, you had to buy a new mainboard. It wasn't until Intel released Alder Lake and brought some competition back in the market that people started questioning AMD's decision to withhold support of Vermeer on 300 series boards. I even made a few videos talking about this, that hey, AMD, until Intel is back in the market, Alder Lake looks good. If you want to retain the business of those 300 series owners, then you better allow support and give a hand to people who supported you since day one. This is actually another reason why I'm personally not enthusiastic about first gen AM5 boards, because who knows how long they'll actually be supported for. There was a post I talked about in the past over at the Hardware Lux forums where a user was in touch with ASRock support. ASRock had actually gone against AMD's instructions and had released a BIOS for X370 motherboards that added Vermeer support, who then told ASRock to remove it, and that was disappointing and a bit shady to see. The only reason for this was money. However, like I said, with a lot of 300 series owners feeling burned, people were saying, okay, if I have to buy a new motherboard, I might as well consider Intel as an option. So it wasn't until during the launch of the 5800X 3D and the budget 5000 parts that AMD made it official they were bringing support for Zen 3 to 300 series boards, along with the X3D part, and I was really happy to see that. I just recently upgraded my AX370 Gaming 5 with a 5800X 3D, and it's been working great. Haven't really had any sort of serious issues with it. I did have to update the BIOS, and all I did was drop in the CPU, and away it went. Did have a minor issue with TPM, I'm not sure why, but I just had to reset the module and it went away. At the end, AMD fulfilled their duty to appease users who had supported Zen since day one, and it's actually why I want to remain optimistic about them doing the same with AM5, or rather the 600 series boards, but you can't deny, or you can't be skeptical of their statement after all the nonsense they tried to pull with older chipset boards when AM4 came out. So for those touting AM5 support in the comments, remember that AMD segmented their users through different chipsets in the past, so don't just take their marketing at face value. Because who's to say they can't do a whole 180 on their position, and this time they won't support the chipsets all the way through. Also, for those who are typing in the comments that I'm just an Intel fanboy who's going after AMD for this, I've made plenty of videos in the past as well talking about Intel being anti-consumer for their measly 2-generation socket support. Back in 2017, when I had bought an 1800X on launch, I still had my i5 6600K Z170 system as a secondary build. When I had heard that Intel planned to keep Coffee Lake on LGA 1151, I was amped because I thought Intel might be changing their ways as well. I thought it'd be really cool to drop in an 8700K or 9900K down the road into that Z170 board, but no, they kept their usual antics about not allowing support, so I sold that system and built a Ryzen system. Since then, I've owned no Intel CPUs. Now, another thing I wanted to address from that last video was people disagreeing on my stance in regards to pricing. A lot of people argued that the pricing is really good because they never changed pricing from previous generation and actually decreased pricing for a couple SKUs. Looking back at it, the only model that I'd say has somewhat appealing pricing is the 7950X, since it's actually $100 cheaper against the 5950X when comparing MSRP. Right now, you can get the 5950X on Amazon for about $550. AMD in their own benchmark showed that when it comes to productivity tasks, the 7950X can deliver 30-40% plus performance, so for 30% more money, that's not too bad, it's justifiable, as that's going to be targeted towards consumers in that productivity space. This is the reason why mainstream HEDT is dead, because parts like the 7950X, 7900X, 5950X, 12900K offer such good multi-core performance. Pricing of high-end motherboards in DDR5 will skew this a bit, but like I said in the previous video, consumers in this segment really aren't too worried about that. As for the rest of the SKUs, I feel like they can be substantially cheaper. In my opinion, pricing should have gone something like this. 7600X should have been $199 to $249, 7700X should have been $299 to $349, and the 7900X should have been about $449 to $499. But a lot of people were okay with the pricing because it didn't really change all that much from the 5000 series. What I'll say to that is, over the past couple of years, AMD has done a pretty good job at conditioning people. I guess a lot of people don't realize that the 5000 series was overpriced to begin with. The reason why this was overlooked was because we were in the middle of a global health crisis, and PC parts were just so in demand at that time. Along with that, AMD had no real competition in the market. With the 5000 series, they held the gaming crown, they held the multi-core crown, and they also held the crown in efficiency. There was really no reason to consider Intel, but other than that, there wasn't any reason why the 5000 parts were priced as high as they were, except for, higher profits, money, whatever. Along with that, since the parts were so highly sought after and stock was low, it drove up prices for a while even higher than MSRP, and people still bought them. I know people who had paid something like $460 Canadian for a 5600X. You can bet AMD took note of that, and this is pretty much what gave them the green light to keep prices the same, and why so many people apparently found them to be so good. The non-X variants pretty much proved that they were just banking on early adopters, as the only difference between them was a letter. This was the same for the 3000 series, the same for the 2000 series, and even the 1000 series. Even taking into account inflation, you can't justify a 50% increase for the 6-core or 34% for the 8-core. It's going to be really interesting to see how this holds up once Intel announces the 13th gen Raptor Lake SKUs. If they raise prices, then obviously this bodes well for AMD, but like I said in the video, Intel still has the platform advantage when it comes to pricing, and I also explained in the video earlier how that whole 2025 plus support could turn out to be meaningless. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about was the 12900K versus 7600X benchmark. I can't believe I have to go over this whole thing again, as I gave an explanation for it in my last video, but again, so many people keep falling for the marketing here, and it's quite unbelievable because it wasn't an apples to apples comparison. Had they done a 7600X versus a 12600K comparison, then I would have been okay with that, as they're doing a comparison of a CPU versus one from their competitor in the same segment. Intel's 12600K can beat a Ryzen 9 5950X in some games. Does that mean that the 5950X is a shit tier CPU? No, it really doesn't mean much, because the 5950X isn't targeted towards just gamers. Lisa Su said that now you can get high-end gaming performance at the mainstream price point, but you could have already done that. The 5600X can give you the same performance as a 5950X. Therefore, you can get gaming performance from a high-end processor at a mainstream price point. All this means is that if you're just gaming, you really don't need more than a 6-core CPU. The 12900K and 5950X don't all of a sudden look like bad CPUs, because their main strengths lie in productivity apps. A $300 CPU that can game like a $600 one seems pretty good to me, except you could have already just done that, as I had explained, even if not even for less money. What the fuck, man? Along with that, looking at the footnotes, and there were a couple red flags that stood out to me. First was the memory configuration. AMD had used a DDR5 kit from G.Skill, which has their new Expo memory overclocking profile. It's basically like Intel XMP, but there's some specific tweaks built into the kit that are catered towards Ryzen. They loaded the same profile on the Intel system. Why couldn't they just have said that we manually adjusted all primary, secondary, and tertiary timings ourselves and have this set up as a level playing field? Because then the motherboard is doing all the work, the timings could have been totally different, which does make a pretty big impact and leave a discrepancy. Obviously, an AMD overclocking profile is going to work better on the AMD chip. The second thing was that they used a DDR5 kit clocked at 6000 megatransfers CL30. This is probably the upper limit for the 7000 series, whereas we know Intel can go actually higher than that, but that's fine. I would rather see them normalizing those different variables. Also, in the footnotes regarding the 7950X versus 5950X, obviously since the latter doesn't support DDR5, you can't use the same kits. But the kit they gave the 5950X also wasn't great. It's not the slowest, but they were leaving performance on the table, which obviously makes the 7000 series look better. The third thing was, and this is a big one, is that SAM was enabled. Why? Everyone knows that SAM will work better if you have an AMD CPU paired with an AMD GPU, versus Intel having resizable bar enabled with the 6950 XT. This right there skews the numbers towards AMD. When reviews of the CPUs come out, I urge everyone to look at as many reviews as possible, because I've got a feeling that numbers are going to vary quite drastically. Since some people will test with an AMD GPU and SAM enabled, versus some people testing with NVIDIA GPUs with SAM or no SAM enabled at all. Some might test with AMD Expo, some will test with their own timings normalized. There's way too many variables here at play. Apart from that, that was basically all I really wanted to talk about. My stance on Zen 4 hasn't really changed. I think it's going to be a pretty hefty investment up front. There were things in the benchmarks that have made me very curious about what kind of performance we'll see when NDA lifts, and I still think there are much better value alternatives. When Intel unveils Raptor Lake and they show off some wonky benchmarks or prices are absurd as well, I'll also make a video about that as well, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. For now, we still have to wait for Zen 4 benchmarks, and also find out how much these motherboards are going to cost. If you guys found this video to be informative and entertaining, then leave a like. Let me know your thoughts and comments down below. Be sure to check out the video description for cool links and ways to support the channel, such as using my Amazon affiliate link. And if you're interested in seeing more content like this, then consider subscribing, I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.